1 Corinthians 7. Instructions for the married and the unmarried. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 contains Paul's response to certain matters raised by the Corinthians about marriage, celibacy, divorce, and remarriage. He also addresses issues related to marriages between a believer and a non-believer, and the status of those who are unmarried or widowed. Exegesis by sections. Verses 1 to 9. On marriage and being unmarried. Paul responds to a statement about it being good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman that was asked by the Corinthians. He acknowledges the value of celibacy but also recommends marriage as a safeguard against sexual immorality. He instructs spouses to not deprive each other sexually, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time for prayer. For those who are unmarried and widows, Paul says it is good for them to remain unmarried, like he is, but if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. Verses 10 to 16. On divorce and mixed marriages. Paul states that it is the Lord's command that a wife should not leave her husband, and a husband should not divorce his wife. To the rest, Paul says, if a believer has a non-believing spouse who is content to live with them, they should not divorce. He reasons that the unbelieving spouse is made holy through the believing spouse. However, if the unbelieving partner leaves, the believer is not bound and should live in peace. Paul encourages them with the thought that the believing spouse might save the unbelieving one. Verses 17 to 24. Remain in the state in which you were when you became a believer. Paul instructs the believers to lead the life that the Lord has assigned to them, and in which God has called them. This rule he applies to all the churches. He uses the examples of circumcision and slavery to illustrate this point. Whether circumcised or not, a slave or a free person, what really matters is keeping the commandments of God. Verses 25 to 40. On virginity, widows, and marriage. Paul said that he has no direct command from the Lord but offers his opinion. He advises that because of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain unmarried. He extends this advice to those who are bound to a wife, those who are not bound to a wife, those who have never been married, and widows. While he acknowledges the legitimacy of marriage, he points out the undivided devotion to the Lord that being unmarried can offer. He affirms that both marriage and being unmarried are good, but encourages the Corinthians to seek to live in a way that is pleasing to the Lord without distraction. Overall summary. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is primarily focused on matters of marriage, being unmarried, divorce, and remarriage, providing detailed teachings on these subjects. Paul discusses the sanctity of marriage, the circumstances under which divorce is permissible, and the value of being unmarried, for the sake of undivided devotion to the Lord. He also encourages believers to remain in the state in which they were called, underscoring that it is godly living that truly matters.